Welcome back to another wonderful edition of the Wizard Shop. In a previous video, we asked you guys to submit some Mercedes questions in the comment section, and I would try to answer them for you in a future video. Well, that future video is today. We're going to go over some Mercedes Q&A, and we're going to do so next to Mrs. Wizard's old ML350. It's actually for sale. As you see, we've had it out front for sale. If anyone's interested in it, we have an email address below. If it's still listed, it's still for sale, and we can get you some pictures and some information if you're interested. 11.5 is what we're asking for it. So this is for sale. It's a very good car. We haven't had to do anything to it really, but just oil changes and tires and whatnot, and there's nothing wrong with it. It was time to do something new. She wanted something newer, so this thing's on the block for sale. Before we get started on the questions and answers, I have a really interesting little story of a car that just came in today. It's the guy that owns the Lotus Esprit Turbo we have in the shop. Let's go over and take a look at it real quick before we get started. It's a really interesting story. We're going to be working on that too. This is a 1980 Triumph TR8. The guy that owns the Lotus just bought this. He literally just bought this thing, and he was driving around getting the registration done, and it died on him. He said, well, that's weird, so he started it back up. And it's kind of funny, I guess, but when it finally died on him again, there were sparks coming out of under the dash right at his crotch. It was just like fireworks, like 4th of July, he said. This car was literally trying to make him sterile. He was like, what is going on here? He literally went to the side of the road, got out, and just ran away from the car. He was like, oh my God, what in the world just happened? So it's here. I'm going to have to figure out why it did that. Let's take a look under the hood. There's an interesting engine under the hood of this car. Then we'll get over to the Q&A. We're going to be going through this car. He said with the way that thing was shooting sparks at him, he said, I want it gone through front to back because I don't need to have that happen again. So that's understandable. There's going to be some more videos on this. This is a 3.5 liter Rover V8. It's us silly Americans, I mean, I know what it is, but most Americans, I've told some of my buddies, hey, check out this engine, look at a picture, and they're like, what the hell is a Rover V8? But if you go over to England, this is so common. It's like a Chevy 350. They're everywhere. They're all over the place. It basically is a General Motors engine. It harkens back to the 60s with the Buick 215 aluminum V8. The program was scrapped. They didn't like it. Rover bought this engine from them. So these are in Land Rover Discovery 1s, Discovery 2s. They're all over the place. So anyways, we're going to be doing a lot of work to this car. We're going to be doing some videos on it, and I thought I'd just share the crazy story with you guys. It's kind of hilarious in a way. So let's head on back over to the ML. Before we get started with the questions and answers, I'll give you guys a little history on Mercedes Benz. Carl Benz actually made kind of, I guess you call a horseless carriage type vehicle in 1899. But as far as being a vehicle on the market for sale, that wasn't until 1901. The Daimler Motor Company actually mass-produced these as a Benz vehicle. But where did Mercedes come from? Mercedes-Benz. Where did that come from? It was used in a race in 1899 by, and I might butcher the name on this, but Emil Jelinek, or however you say it. He was actually racing a Benz car, but it was just being released to the public. They didn't want anyone to know what it was, so he named it after his daughter, Mercedes. And he did his race. Everything went well, and he won. And everyone was like, Mercedes, Mercedes. And he said, no, actually it's a Benz, and it just kind of went from there, Mercedes-Benz. There you go. That's where the name came from. It is the most well-known automotive brand in the world. You can go to Africa, you can go to Asia, you can go to Europe, you can go to America, South America. I don't really care where you go on this planet. If you say Mercedes-Benz, people will say, oh, a car. I mean, it's everywhere. It's a very, very popular brand. It's 120 years old, basically, roughly. It's one of the oldest, if not the oldest, automaker in the world. It's a German company, but they have manufacturing plants all over there's like 30 or 40 countries all over the place that make these. So that's kind of a short little rundown of the history of Mercedes-Benz, and now let's get into the Q&A. I'll be reading from this here, some of the questions. The first one we have is from Gaminix. He says, is a 2014 C300 reliable? It has good reviews online, but what kind of cost could he look at over the next 10 years? Those vehicles are actually pretty reliable. They're not so complicated like an S-Class or something with gadgets and gadgets packed into the interior and things that break. They're fairly reliable. As far as costs, I would say when you get close to the end of that 10 years and even passing that 10 years, you can plan on $2,000 to $3,000 a year in maintenance and repairs. On an older Mercedes, you can bank on that, if not more. So if it's something you're going to plan to keep in a long term, you just need to budget for that. Next, Ken Hurdle. He has an 02 CL500. The shop says it needs a motor mount. Is it hard to replace? Has no issues with vibrations. As far as it being hard to replace, it's going to need to be on a lift, and you're going to need a transmission jack. You're going to have to partially raise the motor after you undo the bolts to get the motor mount out and put the new one in. Is this something you can do on the ground with a jack, a bottle jack or a floor jack? I suppose you could, but it'd be kind of risky and it'd be very difficult. A lot of cursing involved. I could foresee that. So, and what you could do with that situation is you have a drivable car that's having an issue and you get it apart and you can't get it back together, something's not right. Now you just turned your car into a brick until you can get it to a shop or towed or whatever. So you just need to be careful with that. Something I would check with if it's running rough or vibrations you're mentioning is ignition issues. Is it a bad coil? Is it bad spark plugs? Something along those lines, a vacuum leak. I would check into that before I checked into the motor mounts. This guy, that's his name, this guy, has a W123 300D. Are there any concerns or problems he should look at? Well, one of the things I always see on the older ones is the ALDA for the turbo that controls the turbo. There's a kind of an opaque vacuum line. Those things always get plugged up with soot. You can actually see it through the line. It's black. Check that. It's very visible right there from the turbo. You can find the line and check it out. Another thing to check out is vacuum leaks. Does your power door locks work? When you turn the car off, does it shut off right away? Or does it sit there and kind of fall on its face slowly? Any kind of vacuum leaks on this car can have issues to actually shut off the car. You'll have to get out and manually shut it off. That's the one thing to check for is vacuum leaks. Cruise control, there's a little silver box with an arm with a linkage that does your cruise control. Those things failed. That or the cruise amp that's under the dash, the cruise amplifier module. Those things fail with age, like pretty regularly. You can count on it. It's very likely if you go to look at one of these, it doesn't work. It's very likely. So keep that in mind. Another thing is on a 300D, you're going to have climate controls, and you're going to have a climate control system called a duo valve. Those fail, and it either goes full hot or cold, and you have to replace the duo valve, and they're not cheap. It's actually not hard to do, but they're not cheap, so keep that in mind. Those are a few things you can look into checking. Also oil leaks, check for any oil leaks. So on to the next. Durify asks, he has an A-Class W169 that finds it harder to turn left than right. He has a rusty U-joint. He's calling it a U-joint. But when sprayed with silicone, it gets better for a while. His mechanic thinks it's electrical and doesn't even want to work on the car and can't just tear into it because his friendly neighbors will call the police. So yeah, you definitely don't want to tear into yourself if you're going to have the cops called on you, or probably a housing authority or something like that. That's an issue a lot of people deal with working on their own cars. They have to do it in the garage because they don't want any trouble. You mentioned a U-joint. Something I would check is ball joints, CV shafts, tie rod ends. Is there something in there that you're spraying that's it's making it more lubricated for a little while until the silicone spray evaporates? Very likely you have some sort of a joint issue, ball joint, tie rod end, CV joint, it's tight or something. That's very likely what it is. I'm not sure what you mean by U-joint. There's really no U-joints on one of those. It's an electrical issue. How is it that you're spraying something on and you notice an improvement? That's not an electrical issue. A mechanic must not know what he's looking at or what he's doing. So check those joints I talked about. See if there's anything going on there. If the boots are torn, if it's dry, like a dry socket in there, you might want to check on that. And maybe look into a different mechanic. Sean Roca says, common issues with the E55 AMG, the W210 chassis specifically, which is 96 to 03. Some of the common issues that they have that if you already own this car or if you're going to own this car, you can look forward to replacing, you can almost bank on it. It's going to be mass airflow sensors, all the little vacuum lines, the little rubber elbows and things that go to the hard vacuum lines, those are rotten, they cause vacuum leaks. The harmonic balancer, you're probably going to look to change that. And window regulators, those are very common on the W210s. Your window won't go down or it falls down. You're going to be looking to replace window regulators. Those are really some of the common, they're really not that bad of a car in the W210 chassis. Those are some of the main issues you can look forward to. Moz for Life asks, what is the best source for Mercedes parts, genuine or aftermarket? Either way. So, I personally use Worldpack. That's who I use, but you really have to have a commercial business to have a Worldpack account. Some of the vendors I'm going to mention to you get their parts from Worldpack. So I can't really recommend Worldpack, but some of the ones I can recommend is Pelican Parts online. They sell a lot of Mercedes parts. You can go, they can type in the model, the year and everything, and they can list all the parts, and it's really easy to use their online setup. eBay is another option. eBay, you might find OEM parts there, but mostly it's going to be aftermarket stuff. Pelican Parts would have OEM. There's FCP Euro, which would be similar to Pelican Parts. And there's the dealership. Amazingly, sometimes you can get parts at the dealership fairly reasonable if you just call around and ask. They're not so much higher than you think they would be, and they're genuine. So on to the next. Let's see here. Russian Nuke says, would an 08 CL 550 with 68,000 miles for $14,000 be a good buy, or will it have lots of problems? On this, I answered it. It isn't really going to depend on the model so much as you need to check the maintenance history. When you go to visit with the person you're buying it from or looking to buy it from, ask to see records, ask to see service history. Has it had regular oil changes? If there's been any issues, have they been addressed? Is there software updates? Is there anything along those lines that's been addressed? If all those things have been taken care of, regardless of the common issues with any certain model, you have a very good chance, you stand a very good chance to have a good car. But if there is no service history, you could very likely run into a lot of problems. You just don't know. And that's one of the reasons, like when we bought Mrs. Wizard's new Land Rover Discovery Sport, it had a clean Carfax, it had service history all the way up to the month that we bought it. All it's had was tires and brakes and simple things like that. It was a lease vehicle. The lease was up, and it went directly into our hands. So that's a good history. That's a good history. Next we have Ilias Lamari. Says, what is the best chassis in the 70s for a daily driver, 123 or 126? My answer to that is very easy. It's the 123. It's tested, proven with millions and millions of miles as taxis and ferry services and things like that all over the world. Germany, South Africa, South America. Those 123s are all over the world. Some of them have 600,000, 700,000, 800,000 miles on them. And they're still using them in business, working with them. So it's very easy for me to recommend the W123. They're pretty bulletproof as far as cars go. And when they do fail, they're not that hard to maintain or replace. And there's not a lot of gadgets on them and a lot of weird stuff. Willem Klunder asks the thoughts on the OM 603 350 SDL or SD. And my thoughts on it is what that motor is called is the rod bender. It's very common for those to bend the rods. They also have bad issues with head gaskets. The good thing is all the issues they've had with that engine, those engines have either died by now and they're off the market, or they've been fixed properly and now they're for sale. The one that you might be looking at is probably a good buy because it's either been repaired or the issues that it could have had it's survived. It's made it this long. It's probably not going to break. But if you're not a do-it-yourself mechanic, I wouldn't recommend to buy it because if any issues like these do arise, it's going to cost more than the value of the vehicle to get it fixed. So that's something to keep in mind when you go to look at one of these. Got a few more to go here. Dep Rent asks, are Mercedes Benz in general declining in quality? And I would say yes, they are. A lot of them to me look like Honda Accords anymore. As they're coming down the road, you say, is that a new Accord? Oh, it's a Mercedes Benz, wow. And I've gotten some of the newer ones, 14, 15, 16, and that quality feeling that I used to feel with older Mercedes is not there. I literally feel like I'm sitting in a Honda. It does look better on the interior. It has better design aesthetics, but the materials used and the way they're attached, you can push on the dash, push things. So I think the quality is going down. The engines are probably okay. They're having transmission issues, I know that, but as far as build quality, yeah, they are declining. Owen Henderson says, what are the advantages of Airmatic versus hydraulic suspension? Well, Airmatic is cheaper to repair, easier to repair. It could be something simple as a cracked airline or an air spring that's leaking. They're not that expensive, they're not that hard to replace. And there could be valve blocks or compressor. Any of these things are fairly reasonable to work on, and the cost can be kind of high, but it's not like heart attack high. However, the hydraulic suspension, you've got the SLS type pump, you've got hydraulic hard lines and flex hoses, and the hydraulic suspension, like the shocks and things, it can be really, really high, expensive to work on. Here's another thing to think of when you think about these. When you have an air leak on your Airmatic, it's unfortunate. But if you look under the car, it's dry. And when you go to work on it, your hands will be dry because it's air. On the hydraulic system, when it fails, you can have a huge puddle on the ground. When you go to work on it, you're going to be covered in slime. So, which one do I want? Airmatic. Just a simple no-brainer, Airmatic. And the last one I have is Landon 822. He asked the 2013 C300 common issues. They have a lot of high pressure fuel pump failures. Blower motors are actually some of the common things. There's also the transmission can be very jerky, but there's a fix for that. It's a software update. You do have to go to a dealer or someone who has Star Diagnostics and they can update the software on it. But as long as the software is updated, it seems to take care of that problem. Lots of people have tried this and tried that and different things to try to fix the jerky transmission issue. It always comes down to the software, and they get it updated and they're back on the road and they're happy. But like I mentioned earlier, the C300s don't have a whole slew of problems. They're actually not too bad once you get these few issues taken care of. A lot of the Mercedes I've always enjoyed working on are literally a lot of the older models, and they're some of the ones that are built back in the days when they were built like tanks. The 126s, the 123s, especially those two, and some of the older 190Ds, 240Ds, all those different cars. I really enjoy working on those, especially some of like the S420, the S500, and I really enjoyed working on those. But a lot of the newer ones, like I said a minute ago, there's a lot of quality issues. If you want a Mercedes Benz and you want the classic Mercedes Benz look, 123, 126, that's going to be a good car for you. But if you do your own work, you can buy any of them that you want. You can work on it. I guess that's it for the Q&A on the Mercedes. We'll be doing some more of these on different models or different makes of cars. If you guys have seen any tools or anything I've used, especially in the previous videos where I showed a lot of the tips, I showed you some of the tools I use, check my Amazon affiliates page. They're for sale there. Some of you have mentioned that the relay kits, you can't find them on my affiliates page. You can find them. They're on the power tools section of our affiliates page. They're there for you. We have merchandise, we have shirts, hoodies, different things, hats for sale. Check that out. If you haven't already, click the subscribe button and the little bell. We have many more cool videos to come. And I hope you guys are enjoying the 4K and the better audio. Until next time, thanks for watching.